Here's the question that sounds like it has an obvious answer. What is Christian doctrine? Everyone seems to know. It's the Westminster Confession, the 5 fundamentals, the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Formula, the doctrines of grace, the Catechism. 2,000 years of theological consensus formed by careful minds, by big minds, propositions refined in controversy and stabilized in councils, defended against heresy. Doctrine is the body of Christian teaching, everyone will say. The set of beliefs that define Christianity. And that consistency is exactly the problem. It's not because the propositions are false, because the church has confused the proposition about the truth with the truth itself. It has taken didachē, doctrine, the word the apostles used, and filled it with content the apostles did not mean. So before asking what doctrine became, we have to ask what it actually was. What didachē actually is in the New Testament use. The meaning of didachē is not determined by dictionaries, it's determined by usage. And when the New Testament uses the word, it does something remarkably consistent that we do not do. What is called teaching or doctrine is not general religious instruction. It's not ethical guidance. It's not a system of theological propositions. It's repeatedly and specifically tied to Old Testament texts being cited, interpreted, and identified in relation to Jesus. Where the teaching appears in explicit form, it is anchored always to the prophetic corpus. So look, here we have a few examples. Just a few. Luke 4:32, Jesus says he is the fulfillment of Isaiah 61, 1 through 2. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. This is a messianic prophecy. He likens that generation as unclean because they refuse his teaching. He relates the whole incident to Nathan the Syrian and Elijah and the widow. One a Gentile and the other a destitute woman who were nevertheless blessed for their faith. This is prophetic of the coming messianic age. So didachē or doctrine is also mentioned as Matthew 22:33. This is after Jesus' discourse on the resurrection, which is prophesied, the prophesied reign under Messiah. He cites Exodus 3:6, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Doctrine or teaching is also mentioned in Mark 11:18. Here Isaiah 56:7 plus Jeremiah 7:11 is cited. My house will be a house of prayer for all nations. This is straight up messianic prophecy. Now we have Mark 12:38. Just before Jesus quotes Psalms 110:1. The Lord said unto my Lord. Do you see the compression? Do you see how these things are concomitant, set beside each other? Then in Acts 2:42, they were continually devoting themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, we read. Here we see Joel 2 cited, Psalm 16, Psalms 110. The apostolic proclamation formed entirely from prior texts. You should read this incident of Paul in Pisidian Antioch that I bring up in connection with this word doctrine, teaching, or didachē. That word appears in Acts 13:12. Just before Paul went to Pisidian Antioch, the proconsul was amazed at the teaching of the Lord. What follows is an example of that didachē. Psalms 2, Isaiah 55, Psalm 16, Habakkuk 1. Paul's proclamation structured by prophetic citation from beginning to end. He moves from promise to fulfillment to warning. Let me explain how he does this. He cites Psalm 2, establishes the Son as the enthroned Davidic figure, messianic identity. He cites Isaiah 55, frames the resurrection as the realization of the sure mercies of David. That's covenantal fulfillment. And then finally in Psalm 16, provides the decisive proof, resurrection without corruption. Then Habakkuk 1 turns the whole argument into a prophetic warning against rejecting what has now been demonstrated in Jesus. So all four are concentrated in Acts 13, and they function as a single prophetic chain rather than isolated proof texts. In every case, the teaching is not freestanding. It's the handling of what was written beforehand. Luke does not describe amazement at moral instruction. The astonishment comes when Isaiah is read and then identified. Today, this is fulfilled. Matthew 22 is not abstract theology. It's a single line from Exodus pressed into present tense implication. Mark 11 and 12 are not ethical discourse. They are confrontations between what is written and what stands in front of them. Acts makes the structure explicit, though. The apostles' teaching is a chain of text forming a single claim. What God declared beforehand, he has now done. This is not incidental, it's definitional. There is no instance in these contexts where didachē functions as generalized religious teaching or conclusions detached from the prophetic ground. The content is always textually anchored, prophetically sourced, historically located, publicly examinable, and sharply transcendent and supernatural. A conclusion is not supernatural. It is not transcendent. A conclusion is a concept that we create, hopefully in response to something transcendent that we see. The teaching is not what to think about God. The teaching is what God said would happen, now shown to have happened. That is didachē. That is teaching. That is doctrine. Now, what did the church do with this? Well, that didachē, that doctrine, that teaching is exactly what was replaced. Because once didachē is detached from that structure, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes what we now call doctrine. A set of propositions about Christ, a system of belief, a theological framework constructed, refined, and defended. Not false, but displaced. The apostles did not transmit conclusions about Christ. They transmitted the knowledge of Christ as prophetically declared and historically demonstrated reality. Teaching was messianic prophecy and its fulfillment. The church gradually substituted the explanation of that reality for the reality itself. And that substitution can be seen very early. Now, the didachē in the first substitution. The didachē, the doctrine, the Lord's teaching through the 12 apostles to the nations, is one of the earliest post-apostolic documents we have. On the surface, it appears faithful: ethics, instruction, church order, liturgy. But something is missing, something the apostles never omit. The apostles never present instruction detached from the prophetic ground that makes it what it is. The didachē does. Turn the other cheek. Avoid murder, adultery, lust. Now, that's what the didachē says. And then they're not wrong, of course. But they appear as substance, not expression. As if moral instruction is the foundation rather than the shape of the ground in the revealed identity of the Messiah. The prophetic content, the specific declared and confirmed identity of Jesus, is absent as the active ground. Even where it gestures toward it, when it says, the knowledge and faith and immortality made known through Jesus, the document does not specify what that knowledge is. The name is present, the content that gives the name meaning is not. The finger is there, what it is pointing at is not. This is not a collapse, it's a shift. But a shift at the foundation becomes a collapse over time. Now, contrast this with Christ himself. The Sermon on the Mount is not ethical instruction in isolation. Every statement assumes a prior reality. The one speaking is the one the prophets declared. He does not argue it directly. He speaks as if it has already been established. The entire structure depends on it. Remove that ground, remove the prophetic identity of the speaker, and what remains is moralism. Instruction without revelation, form without foundation, didachē emptied of its content. Now, what begins implicitly becomes explicit in the modern period. Friedrich Schleiermacher defines doctrine not as revealed knowledge, but as the expression of religious experience. Doctrine becomes what the believer feels, articulated in language. Not what God declared, not what was demonstrated, what was experienced. And that shift is total and devastating. Something we are operating in now without even realizing it. If doctrine is the expression of experience, then its truth is measured internally by coherence, by resonance, by communal affirmation. The prophetic ground, the external publicly examinable correspondence between declaration and fulfillment, is no longer necessary. It becomes background, then optional, then irrelevant. The Old Testament, in his system, becomes marginal. The thing that made Christian knowledge demonstrable and transcendence is replaced by the thing that makes it personal. And from that point forward, every tradition, liberal or conservative, that locates truth in system, confession, or experience operates within that immanent framework. Now, what is didachē, or doctrine, actually? Now, return again to Matthew 7. The distinction is not between moral success and failure. The people rejected are not immoral. They are active, effective, religiously impressive, and yet I never knew you. Not because their statements were incorrect, because their claims were not grounded in the revealed reality that makes the name of Christ mean what it means. Their doctrine had form, and it lacked origin. The Pharisees had doctrine, precise, structured, preserved doctrine. Christ's critique is not primarily about content, it's about source. Their teaching does not arise from the prophetic word brought to fulfillment, and therefore it does not constitute knowledge. So what is doctrine? Didachē. Not a proposition about Christ, not a creed concerning Christ, not a theological system. It's certainly not a religious experience. Doctrine is the revealed, historically demonstrated, prophetically confirmed knowledge of Christ, which is a transcendent knowledge, the content of what was declared beforehand and identified in its fulfillment. A proposition is true only if it rests on that. It is not the ground. The rock is not the confession. The rock is the reality the confession points to. The church is not collapsing because its propositions are weak. It's collapsing because its propositions are untethered from their ground. The response has been to refine doctrine, defend doctrine, systematize doctrine. This is building a stronger structure on the same displaced foundation. The apostles did not transmit a system. They transmitted something that did not need a system to sustain it. The correspondence between what God declared beforehand and what he brought to pass. That is self-attesting. That is supernatural in transcendence. That is public. That is stable. That is didachē. Now, what kind of doctrine are we really talking about in the church when we speak of doctrine? The deity of Christ, the virgin birth, the faith, salvation by faith alone, salvation by works and faith, various formulations like substitutionary atonement, penal substitution, and all the rest. Those are doctrines. Read the Nicene Creed. Those are doctrines. What doctrines are in our estimation is just a list of conclusions. That's all it is. We've had 2,000 years of this doctrine, and the thing they were pointing at has not moved. It's still there, still written, still demonstrable, still waiting to be recognized as the only transcendent ground that we have. Not as a proposition about the truth, but as the truth itself, declared before, confirmed in history, and known only where that correspondence is seen. That is doctrine, that is didachē. Not what we made it, what it was.